Hey, Alex here from Black Sheep IT Consulting. Welcome to the second part of our CSV data import recap and journey back in history to all the way back to 2017 when I rewrote an old article on how to accomplish a pop-up that allows you to upload a file and import some arbitrary seeable data. So again, we'll start with a demo first, and then we'll dive into the details. So here I have the toolbar button, Black Sheep Data Import, that we created in the first part. Check out the link in the description if you haven't seen the first part. And that opens a pop-up. And I've removed all configuration on that pop-up. So that means that's the plain applet that we created in step 1. And you notice it's a copy of a standard Siebel applet. It has a file browser button. It has an import button, which is actually in the way because it's active. It shouldn't be active. So let's make up a requirement right now. As a user, I want the import button to be inactive as long as I haven't chosen a file. But let's choose a file right now. And that, of course, works fine. And I can click import and just goes away. Okay, so that's not very nice. And if you watched the demo in the first part, you've seen a little bit more customizations here. So let's make up a few more requirements. And let's check out our second part of the article series on the Siebel Hub. Again, you find a link in the description. So this dialog, again, this is in all its IP15 glory. It looks a little bit different now. But first, we want the import button to be inactive when no file is selected. We might want to remove or relabel the cancel button. Well, not sure about this one. But can we show a progress bar is an interesting one. Because the user would like to see at least some indication something is going on and maybe some feedback at the end even. Okay, that was a success, that was a failure. This is what happened to each of the hundreds of records you imported. So as a user, I would like to have a little bit more information, what is going on, what happened. So how do you do this? This is a pop-up applet. And the first thing that you might think of, and same happened to me, is that, well, a physical renderer should do the trick. A physical renderer for that custom pop-up applet. So, and I found to my dismay that even if I associate a physical renderer with that pop-up applet, it's never loaded. This is probably because it's a special class of applets and it's a pop-up. It's an arbitrary pop-up that is not bound to a specific, let's say, business component or view or whatsoever. So I had a hard time actually getting code to run when this applet is loaded, which is of course the realm of a physical renderer in the first place. So we have to strike our idea of a physical renderer, but we need JavaScript code to manipulate that. And the article, well, deals a little bit with the details, what you want to achieve. For example, here, let's check out this screenshot. So you want to choose the file, then make the import button active and show a, well, animation of sorts, a progress bar, maybe with some information about the file name and file size and so forth. So bring a little bit more information to the user. So, and in the article, it's just not really showing us code, but it tells us what we have to do. So first you have to monitor the UI, wait for the dialog to be opened, because we can't use a physical renderer. So we can't register a file that is loaded with the applet. So we have to monitor the UI, wait for the dialog. That's an interesting technique that we learned today. And well, we need to understand the HTML in the form, get the files list of the file input. If the file list is empty, we can change the import button via CSS. We can hide the cancel button. Well, let's cancel that cancel button. So we keep the cancel button. But we might want to change the style of the dialog, the size and the colors. Yes, good idea. And we need a custom click event handler on the import button to display a progress bar and file information. And so we only can display an animation. We don't need when it's ended or how much longer will it take. So the progress bar is just infinite and just displays something is going on. Okay, let's do first things first. What about monitoring the UI? What does this mean? So I don't want to stand behind here and just look at people using AI to solve problems. So I fired up ChatGPT 3.5, the free one, and I asked it, how can we monitor the UI of a web page, take action when a certain pop-up is displayed? Not really maybe a very specific question. So ChatGPT got very excited and says, yes, you can use Python and Selenium and whatever. And that's not the path I wanted. So I stopped it. And the second, so I specified I want to use only native JavaScript. And it told me that, okay, you can use event handling. So you can use set interval and call a function every 1 second, and then check if the pop-up exists, which is quite clever and would surely work. But I think, and I asked it, isn't there a better way to observe for changes? And you might see what I've been doing here. So I nudged ChatGPT or anybody else into more or less checking their knowledge base, and a human would just Google and would find the Mutation Observer API, which is available in every modern browser. And the Mutation Observer is really a cool thing, and I wanted to just demonstrate the capabilities here and use it for our requirement. So here I am on the Mozilla Developer Network on the Mutation Observer page. The link is in the description. You find it easily enough. And it describes what a Mutation Observer is. So it watches for changes that are made to the DOM tree. So you can observe the entire DOM, let's say the body, or you can observe parts of the DOM, such as a specific applet in Siebel, and watch out for changes. And those changes can be either child elements are added, or the subtrees modified, or attributes. So the example really is very cool. So you have a target node, some DOM element you specify whether you want to observe attribute, child list, and subtree changes. And then you have a callback function that gets the mutation list and the observer, and it checks basically, was there a mutation of, let's say, a child list, and it's just logging to the console if that happened. So you see the point here for Siebel, we can observe if the DOM is modified, a specific applet is popping up, for example, and then we can take some action here. And the key line of establishing the observer is to, well, create the observer definition and then start observing, or later you want to disconnect it. Okay, so let's put that into Siebel mode. And here I am within a file which is part of DevPops. And DevPops is literally loaded as a post-load event handler. So that means I create a function is called bcrm create pop-up observer, and I have literally copy-pasted the code from Mozilla here. Of course, made a few modifications. The thing I'm observing is the body. I only want interested in child list and subtree modifications, not attributes. And in the callback function, in the child list function, I am checking using the component manager of Siebel and an applet list. Let's say I could add, the function is called create pop-up observer, so I could have a list of pop-up applets I'm waiting for. And it iterates that list, and if it finds an applet with this name in the component list. So that means that applet is fully operational in the is actually loaded in the view. That is true for case of pop-ups. Then set a quick timeout for 100 milliseconds because the applet might not yet be fully loaded at that point in time, and call a function to enhance the pop-up applet. And that's it. Break. So literally observe the body if anything is happening, and actually that fires a lot of times. But if it finds that specific applet we're looking for, it calls a special function to enhance that applet. So it's literally when the pop-up applet opens, we know it and we can do something. So that function create pop-up observer I placed into a listener. So I'm establishing a listener here on app init. I only need to do it once. App init is not fully documented, but it's loaded once the application is initialized. That will just launch that function to create the observer. And of course, I have to implement the function which actually enhances the applet. And there it is. So here's my BCRM enhance pop-up applet function. It takes an applet name. The first thing it does is pretty generic. It establishes the component manager, the PM of the applet, finding the component, getting the PM, getting the PR, the full ID, the control set, the applet element. So we're grabbing the DOM element of the applet here, and this display or dialog container, as I call it, finding the closest dialog content element on the applet. Is literally a wrapper around the applet because it's a pop-up applet. It's inside a jQuery dialog. And now we're checking if there is a PM property, BCRM enhanced, set to true, which is not at this point. And we check if this is the specific applet we're looking for, because now it gets applet specific. So we establish a browsing element, that is the file browser button. And you notice I'm using the PR, get UI wrapper, find the control, which implements the file browser, which is the find file or file locator, get the element. So that returns the jQuery element of that button. Same for the import button. Get that files array. A file button in a browser has a files array, and that's at the moment that's 0 files. A variable for the error text if there is any. Remove any progress bar if there is any residual progress bar. And then, as one example of manipulating the applet already, is changing the width using the dialog option to get a proper resize of the dialog to 500 because it's too small. That could be achieved differently with CSS, but it's just one example of actively modifying the DOM here. And first requirement implemented here, if files array length is 0, there are no files loaded yet, add a class to the import button called applet button this. That's a standard Siebel class, and it essentially disables the button. If a button has this class, there's no interaction possible, and it's gray. It works like a charm. You don't have to do anything else. That's the power of Siebel Open UI here. You see, we also established change event handlers on the file loader, because when the file array reaches greater than 0, we actually remove the disabled class from the import button. And there's the import button itself with a click event handler. So that is a little bit more involved, but as you can see, it deals with creating the progress bar. So we'll check it out, of course, in a moment. And also a little bit more involved is the dialog close function. That will be actually needed in the third part of the video. So we won't discuss it right now, but you can see on dialog close, there is essentially alerts displayed in the Siebel way using either successfully or import failed. And then again, there's another function which explain in the third part of the video. So let's focus on the first part of the enhanced pop-up applet function. So here I'm in the Siebel application with the post load handler loaded. So I've put a breakpoint inside the function which establishes the observer and defines the callback function for the observer. So I've set the breakpoint before the set timeout. So that's basically when it has found the applet we're looking for. So let's see if that works. It should stop here whenever the applet is opened. So if I click the toolbar button, yes, indeed, you see the applet says loading, please wait. It's not really fully loaded, but it has jumped in here. It's now setting the timeout and calling enhanced pop-up applet after 100 milliseconds. So let's put a breakpoint basically in here, because we should jump in here the next thing. So the timeout again, you see how often it fires, literally. Fires a little bit too often for my okay, so fires a bit too often, maybe, but here we are in the section which only runs once. So make sure it runs once because we're checking a PM property that we set at the end of the code. So now it's actually undefined. You can see it's not yet defined. So once the code has finished, we set that property so we never run that code again. This is how one way of avoiding code to run too often for a given object in OpenUI. So we have found this is actually the applet we're looking for. It's not visible in the UI yet because of the debugger, but I think we can safely get, or not. Let's run this again. Okay, so running it again, debugger being buggy. And we have the BEL, you see the input for the file chooser or file browser using the get the UI wrapper of the physical renderer, regular OpenUI code here. Then getting the import button also worked fine. Oh, removing the non-existent progress bar. Now comes the dialog with change, executed nicely. And we check the files array, which is 0 right now. And we can add the class. Now watch what happens to the import button. Goes gray, because we're adding that standard class applet button this for disabled applet buttons. Then we establish the change event handler on the file browser, the click event handler on the import button, the dialog close event, and we have a post proxy execute binding on the import function. So that's essentially the PM way of finding out that the server has returned the results of the import function, so we know when the process is finished. But again, those later, the last two functions, we'll explain in more detail in part 3 of the video series, so check out the links for the description. So now that process has finished and we have implemented a resize of the dialog and the disableness of the import button as requested. Now let's check out what we can do to display a progress bar once the import button is clicked. So let's have a quick demonstration first. So I choose a valid file, click import, and there's a progress bar. And it's infinite, so it's not displaying will be finished in 5 seconds or so. That's literally really hard to do, stuff like that. But the process has already finished, of course, and we also display feedback, which again, feedback is in part 3. So let's not dwell on this too much. So let's focus on that progress bar. And the whole progress bar is implemented on the click event handler on the import button. So first we set the property bCRM error to false. So literally resetting a property indicating if there's any error. Of course, nothing has happened yet, so we can safely set it to false. We get the files array again, and we save the file name and the file size as properties. You notice that's displayed in the alert at the end. We could display it right away if we wanted to. Now we have the data. I'm setting it as presentation model properties because now it's saved as part of the presentation model. I can retrieve it easier that way. I could use local storage, session storage. Session storage probably would be maybe a good idea too. Global variables, you name it. I choose the presentation model here. And we look for a progress bar. So something with this ID, but it's not there yet. So we create a diff with that ID. And we find the applet buttons element in the applet, go up to parents, and then place the progress bar before that. So you would have to do some inspection of the dialog, where to place that progress bar, and then it's a jQuery progress bar. So all we have to do is make that diff a progress bar with value false. A value false actually is the infinite progress bar and has that nice default animation. Of course, you can go to great length with CSS. You can use different libraries. I use jQuery. You might want to use Shoelace, or you're well down the train with Vue.js or React. In any case, you will be able to display an element which looks like a progress bar to the user and displays, well, there is something going on. So that literally is all we need to do, literally 2-3 lines of code to add that progress bar into the proper position and make sure it's visible, it's properly styled. So let's see it one more time. So I'm placing a breakpoint right at the beginning of that progress bar functionality in the code. So here we still have a breakpoint here, so let's remove it. So I choose the file, and now let's click import. As you can see, no progress bar yet. It stops here on the click event handler. Now it creates that progress bar diff. It adds it. It's still a more or less empty diff, and now only by calling the progress bar function of jQuery UI, now we have the progress bar. And it will be displayed forever because we don't really know when the process is finished. Okay, let's continue. And of course, now the process is finished. There's an alert displayed. You could also have a different display, dialog of sorts, or a toast. And once we click OK, the close event happens. And we can display other stuff like the status object. But again, that's part 3. So let's see it one more time. And yeah, there's a progress bar. All right. So back to the original article on the Siebel Hub, which discusses, it does not show any code, but discusses, and in the video I've shown you some code, how to implement it. The code will be uploaded to GitHub in case you want to use it, but I strongly encourage you to find your own way of doing similar things. Again, remember we have used the mutation observer to do the monitoring part, because there is no physical renderer to be attached to this special class of applet. Special case, you can use a renderer if you have to. If you can use a renderer, that's what I want to say. We grab the correct DOM elements, for example, to change the import button appearance, we added a special class, or we changed the size of the dialog, and we have that click event handler on the import button so we can display a animated progress bar. Okay, that's it for part 2 of this 3-part series. Check out the links in the description. Thanks for watching this one. Take care and bye-bye.